Okay, let's talk about the Spark, the Scott Spark 710. This is totally new. They've redesigned this whole line, and they've kind of broken it up into, you've got your race models, you have plus models, and the one we tested is a trail model. So it's a bit slacker than it used to be, new geometry. They've redesigned the shock mount, so they use the trunnion mount now that allows a lower standover. It's got a really nice, clean look. It looks totally different. And I thought it rode pretty well. I mean, it's still very XCE. Really stiff frame, pedals really well. What'd you guys think?
I have to say, I was really pleasantly surprised. This was actually one of my favorite riding bikes because, again, the back end did just feel so plush, but also very responsive. For me, it definitely fit more in that XC category than a bigger trail bike.
And it's a 120.
It's
so
120.
I mean, it can go both ways.
So that's what I would expect.
Yeah. Kudos to Scott for putting a dropper on. That's something we haven't always seen on this bike. They use the Fox Transfer, which I actually really like.
I didn't have any issues with that at all.
Yeah. So it is a 2x drivetrain, which I kind of feel like, they probably could have spec'd this as a 1x, but it's a great mix of Shimano SLX and XT. It's a $4,300 bike for a carbon frame,
right?
Alloy triangle, rear triangle. I mean, it's a really good value, I think. So there are some carryovers, I guess, from what we've seen on Scott before. Twin lock being one of them. That's the remote controlled shock and fork lock out it. So you go from fully open to 85 mil to locked out, like super firm locked out, remote activated, and it controls both of them at once. So you're either locked out in the front and the rear or open. You can't do it separately.
To be really honest, I thought the bike rode pretty stiff for me.
Yeah.
I didn't need to lock the shocks at all.
No.
It's a nice option to have if you're doing a lot of pretty intense climbing on fire roads or something like that. I think it's a nice option to have, but I think for what we were riding, pretty undulating, kind of, not terribly technical stuff, it was nice to have a little bit of a little play. And I found it just open, it felt really fine.
And I almost feel like the build is geared to somebody who is going to be doing a lot of climbing, both by having the 2x up front, having the twin lock, that person who does want to fiddle a bit and really sit in the saddle for a few hours going uphill or a few minutes.
Yeah.
If you're me.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that kind of brings us to who this bike is for. I feel like Scott's kind of always seems to be targeted at that XC rider, but
I think it's more of an aggressive XC rider with a 120 mil fork. You can get after it a bit more on this bike, and I think it's pretty responsive, and I think it's a bit more forgiving than past models, and I'd say it's definitely geared for a climber, but somebody who's wants to take some risks on the descents too.
And my only real qualm with this bike was that crowded cockpit. There was a lot of cables. There were 7 cables coming off the handlebar. But at the same time, it's one of those things where somebody's pro is somebody else's con. And I think for me, I prefer that simplistic cockpit. I don't tend to lock out my bike.
It's like science in a cockpit.
Another nice thing with this model is to see that, Scott they've really left this line rather large, for this women's line rather large, which is, it's really nice. They've got a badass woman. Jenny Risved just won the Olympic gold on the race version of the Spark, and it's really cool to see them keep that line rather large. There's plus models, race model, trail model, and we've seen kind of other brands sort of pare down their women's line. So kind of appreciate the fact that Scott is still investing, and even though it's not a different frame from the unisex version, they're
I think there's a lot of value to that, because there are a few different ethos when it comes to the women's bikes. And one of the very prominent ethos is to keeping it the same as the unisex bikes, but paring the size down and just creating more of a feminine marketing scheme, and making sure that female riders are getting reached out to.
Yeah. So even though they have left this line, rather large, they don't offer a 29er version, which is sort of interesting. On the unisex side, there is a Spark 29er, and I mean, I personally think this bike would be awesome
It would
as
be
a 29er.
phenomenal
It's
as a
short
29er.
travel, 120 mil, and I just feel like it would be a great option for women to also have this as a big wheel bike.
And I feel like that's something that we're seeing across a lot of different companies' women's lines, where all of a sudden they've decided that women no longer want 29ers, we only want 27.5s.
PSA, 29ers are kind of rad.
They are. They're really
I'm a convert.
awesome. Yeah. And but sometimes it can be difficult to find them in a small enough size.
Yeah.
And so I really do hope that we start seeing more 29ers come back to those smaller size bike frames.
Definitely.